Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. So it's the countdown, a couple of days, or depending on which part of the planet you're on, maybe even tomorrow, Christmas is going to be upon us. Now the last episode that I did was in fact about how to sort of get through Christmas. There were a few tips that I suggested to make it possibly less complicated, less emotional, although we do want to experience some joy, some sense of happiness in this period of time. But for some of you, as I said, this could be a period of really being emotionally and socially tested, and the temptation is at times to get stuck into focusing on the negatives rather than on, the things that actually can make us feel more joyful, more satisfied with life. And so I was reflecting the other day about, some of the little rituals that we have in our lives. Some of them conscious, some of them not so conscious. And one of the things I became aware of was that, and some people say this is a little bit of a joke, but there's actually a serious note in it, that as we get older and we greet each other, quite often we fall into the habit of, sort of checking in with each other about how are you, and, when we're younger, we generally sort of gloss over it. Yeah, well, I'm good. But as we get older, quite often the conversation starts with, the various challenges, physically at least anyway, that we have. So, it might be, things are pretty good, except, my shoulder hurts, my knees hurts, my hips hurt, and all that sort of stuff. And so, quite often the conversation rolls along on this sort of almost melancholic tone. And I was thinking about whether that's actually really all that useful for us. Is this really something that we want to persist with? Not to say that we shouldn't engage, in an authentic way and being real, but we need to create a balance with it, because some people really just have a tendency to get stuck there. Now, in the last podcast, with some of the things that I suggested to do, and also in the podcast about emotional maturity, I brought up the issue about gratitude. And it's something that's come more into focus in the last several years in psychological theory and practice, and seeing what the benefits are of addressing gratitude, practicing gratitude, and reflecting on it. And it's interesting because one of the things that I've become very aware of in my own clinical practice is that people have a tendency, as we get more and more stressed, we have a tendency to think more negatively, more pessimistically. We have a tendency to catastrophize. And so we, in a way, training our brain to be sensitive to those things. And in fact, we often create, scenarios that have a very remote possibility of coming to pass. This is the problem with catastrophizing. So, for example, if I'm a little bit concerned about security, I might start checking the doors and windows all the time and making sure everything's locked up. And, although that's supposed to reduce our anxiety, in most cases what it actually does is it elevates it. Now I have a personal experience of that because many years ago when I bought my first car, it got stolen. And I became a little, and potentially could have gone into a clinical realm, obsessively compulsive about checking whether the car was locked. And occasionally, I still, my wife laughs at me a little bit, because I still have a tendency to sometimes go, let me check that, right? Now, part of that can also be useful, but let's stick, for a moment on the negative side. So rather than feeling that, once I've checked and really checked and checked again and then checked again, feeling more comfortable about the fact that my car was secure, it actually didn't do that. It, in essence, maintained my unease about whether I was going to get back to that car park and see my car there. So how's this relevant to gratitude? Well, lots of people are talking about biohacking, neurohacking, and it's become sort of a trendy, fatty term. But the reality is that we can really train our brain through how we think. One of the things that comes up in Shakespeare, in Hamlet, is in the soliloquy, one of the soliloquies that Hamlet has is that things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And so, this is fundamentally important, because the way that I think potentially shapes not just my, for want of a better word, software, but also the hardware of the brain, the neural connections. What is it that I'm stimulating? And then not only is it the neural connections, but how does my body respond to that process? What about the muscle tension, my respiration, the biochemistry of my gut, and so on. So, again, the question, how does gratitude fit into that? Now, aside from the fact that gratitude, including in depression, can lift and ease that depression to some degree, I believe it's actually a really, really good way of neurohacking your brain, to use that fancy, trendy term. Because it's like visualization or mental rehearsal, what it is that you pay attention to, right? So what I thought I'd do is, as the lead up to Christmas and everyone's excited and everyone's really stressed, because I keep hearing a lot about that, and that's fine, I'm a therapist, right? People should be able to disclose without any sort of censorship or judgment their concerns to me. But part of my job is also to help them reframe those concerns and to put them into real context. And this is where I come back to the practice of gratitude, is how does that fit in? What's the benefit of it? And as I said, the research is telling us that there's quite a considerable amount of benefit. So in practice, in my counselling and coaching and mentoring, I have a series of exercises that I suggest, not all of them at the same time, but, from time to time with my clients. So it's a conscious and intentional process of beginning to reprogram some of their thinking. Okay, so, one of the really good things in both psychological and physical change is repetition. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of us tend to repeat the wrong stuff, as it were. I spoke about this in the podcast about why do smart people believe dumb things. Okay, so essentially, in doing any gratitude exercise, one of the things that's important is maintaining the practice. So one of the things that I might do in a session is we get to the point where I can sort of help the client engage with the notion of gratitude, because sometimes we can be resistant to actually embracing this concept. Why? Well, I'm really furious, I'm angry, I'm enraged, and you want me to be grateful for something. And so timing in this is particularly important. But in our personal life, I think there are times where we just need to take some time out and go, okay, let me reflect. The question is, what am I reflecting on? Okay, and so I've got a little list of gratitude habits, and I stress the word habits because, as I said, repetition, consistency and persistence is what helps pay this off. We get a good return on investment if we need to think about it in almost economic terms. So I'm going to run through them. I'm not going to give you all of them. I'm going to give you the ones that I think are particularly useful at this point in our year, which is the lead up to Christmas and New Year. As I said in a previous podcast, please don't make New Year's resolutions. Inevitably, many of us get halfway through January and we've already abandoned the New Year's resolution. Then you feel guilty, you feel some shame, especially if you've shared it with somebody. And so, it's not a good thing. So let me begin to give you a little list, and I'll leave it to you to choose which ones you might, sort of grab hold of and utilise. Now, the first one, the easiest one that I tend to think is to do a random reach out, okay? So reach out to somebody for whom you feel gratitude, but you don't necessarily often express that to. Now, you don't necessarily need to pick up the phone and talk to them. Again, these days we often get into phone tag and then we get frustrated and then we sort of forget about it and it doesn't happen. If you can't call the person, how about a handwritten note? That's a novelty these days. I particularly like handwritten notes and cards because there's, this thought that goes into that. Plus, the act of actually handwriting something out is a good way of stimulating the brain. So, that's one. The next one is an immediate sort of expression of gratitude. How often do those of you who are in a relationship express to your partner your appreciation and gratitude? Now, I ask that question a lot when I'm working with guys, and a lot of them go, yeah, well, actually, I told her I loved her the other day, and I go, well, that's great, that's fantastic. But what about clearly articulating what you appreciate or are grateful for with your partner in that relationship? Okay, so that's also an aspect here. The other one is when you greet somebody, right? Try to fit in at the beginning of the conversation something that you appreciate, that you're grateful for with this person. What do they mean to you in their life? It lays the foundation for an open and honest environment where, the relationship can be nurtured further. Again, as men, we tend to be rubbish at this. So, that's particularly something that I would want to encourage a lot of guys to do, including with your kids. So it's not just the partner, but it's also about your children as you're interacting with them as a parent, right? The other bit, and this is interesting because I talk about this particularly in mindfulness and mindfulness training, is slow things down. The mantra around this time of year is busy, 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 right? So, it's very contagious, very addictive. So one way of generating a capacity to feel connected in gratitude is to slow things right down. Another one that I think is really, really useful is to do like an evening expression of gratitude. Evenings are good. We're sort of getting to the end of the day. Some things have worked, some things haven't. A lot of us go to bed, and as we hit the pillow, all the negative stuff, all the stuff that hasn't finished, hasn't worked, rolls out like on a Rolodex. Don't know where that came out. And so, rather than dwelling on that side of things, what about then rounding off and going, okay, let's reflect on what I am grateful for. Now, sometimes it might be as simple as I'm still alive. Now, I'm not being facetious. For some people, that is absolutely at the essence of it. Another form of evening gratitude is that when we sit around a dinner table to